Welcome to the MS&Me Radio Network. The broadcast shows are for informational and entertainment purposes only. They are not designed to provide listeners with specific personal, medical, or counseling advice. Individuals with a medical issue should always consult their healthcare provider. MS&Me is not responsible for content of individual shows. The views expressed by show hosts or their guests are their own. Enjoy the show.
I'm John Strum, and this is RealTalk MS. It's March 6th, and I think we could have called this podcast episode People That Give Me Goosebumps, because everyone we talk to or about on today's podcast, I consider to be among the superstars in the ongoing battle with MS. March is MS Awareness Month, so I thought we would do something special to kick off a special month. First, I'm going to take you inside a private VIP research briefing and have you hear 3 top award-winning MS research scientists describe the work that they're doing in the lab and how it's impacting our understanding of multiple sclerosis. And then I'm going to introduce you to my special guest this week, Emily Blossberg, who I think you'll find is an amazing young lady who's making life better for some of the youngest folks who are living with MS today and their families. But if you're a regular listener, you might recall that last month I attended the ACTRIMS Forum. And just a quick refresher, ACTRIMS is an acronym that stands for the America's Committee for Treatment and Research in Multiple Sclerosis. During the conference, I was fortunate enough to moderate a panel of some of the top MS research scientists in the world. And I know there's already been a lot of reporting about the research topics that were discussed at ACTRIMS and some of the announcements that were made, but this panel discussion took place at a private, invitation-only event hosted by the National MS Society, and there wasn't any other media in the room. So I thought you might like to hear just a snippet of some of the conversation that took place during this panel discussion, and I can guarantee that unless you were in the room with us last month, you haven't heard this anywhere else. Now, the panelists you're going to hear from are first Dr. Jennifer Graves from the University of California, San Francisco. Dr. Graves is a past winner of the American Academy of Neurology Medical Student Prize for Excellence in Neurology, the Neurology Award from the Virginia Mason Medical Center, and the Arthur K. Asbury Resident Award for Clinical Excellence. Dr. Graves received a grant from the MS Society in 2017 to study associations between the biological process of aging and the progression of MS. The next panelist you'll hear from is Dr. Jonah Chan, who is the Debbie and Andy Ratcliffe Professor of Neurology at the University of California, San Francisco. Dr. Chan is the past winner of the National MS Society Harry Weaver Neuroscience Scholar Award, and in 2013, he became the first recipient of the prestigious Barancik Prize for Innovation in MS Research for his work in myelin repair. And finally, you'll hear from Dr. Robin Franklin, Professor of Stem Cell Medicine, Head of Translational Science at the Wellcome Trust MRS Cambridge Stem Cell Institute, and Director of the Cambridge MS Society Center for Myelin Repair. Dr. Franklin has received just a multitude of honors and awards. In 2012, his paper, Rejuvenation of Regeneration in the Aging Central Nervous System, was nominated for top MS-related research paper in the Multiple Sclerosis Journal. He served as co-chair of the Gordon Research Conference on Myelin in 2016, and he is this year's recipient of the Barancik Prize for Innovation in MS Research for his groundbreaking work concerning aging. Seriously, I mean, if there was an MS Research all-star team, all 3 of these panelists would be first-string starters. And I wanted to share just a short clip of each of them describing their own research and what its implications might really be. So in the first clip, you'll hear me pose my question, and then you'll hear Dr. Jennifer Graves explain what her research is about, what they're finding, and how it might add to our understanding of how MS progresses.
Jennifer, like Robin, you're also interested in studying the impacts of aging. You received a grant from the Society to study biological aging as opposed to chronological aging, and how that might relate to progressive MS. First, can you explain how biological aging differs from chronological aging and what you're finding as it relates to impact of biological aging on MS progression?
Well, first of all, age appears to be very important in driving the onset of progressive disease. I take care of both children and adults with multiple sclerosis, and in the pediatric population, we don't see progressive forms of MS. So I can count on one hand the number of children I've ever seen that I thought might have secondary progressive MS. So we don't see that phenotype, whereas in patients who present late in life, we're more likely to see progressive features of the disease. So age is important. The reason why thinking about biological age versus chronological age is important is that everybody with the same birth date or who were born in the same year don't have the same aging phenotype or the aging physiology. There's a lot of diversity. So trying to understand what your biological age may be even more important than what your birth date is. There's people who tried to come up with algorithms, and there have been some very good studies to determine what your biological age is by taking a few different types of samples from your blood, your pulmonary function, your heart function. And one of those studies that was very nicely done, they took a bunch of people, thousands of people who were 38 years old, and estimated their biological age. And their biological age ranged from 20 to 60.
Wow.
So that's, if we want to understand how age is driving these effects, if we take a look at biological aging, we not only might have some more specificity to the process we're interested in for MS, we'll have more sensitivity in our measurements when we try to understand what's driving it. And I think it'll also shed light on the mechanism. If we're paying attention to your biological aging, we may get a better idea of the mechanism of how biological aging could be driving progressive MS. And in our work that we've done, starting with the pilot project, actually from the National MS Society, we started looking at a marker of aging in women around the time of menopause. Happens to be the time where people tend to start developing progressive features for women. And so the hypothesis was maybe there's something happening in the perimenopausal period that is relating to a change in how the MS is expressing itself. And there's a hormone called anti-Müllerian hormone made by the follicular cells in the ovary that correlates very well with ovarian age in women. So we thought that would be a fantastic marker to look at an association with this aging process and MS in women. And we found strong association between both clinical disability, the doctor exam that you get at an MS evaluation, as well as MRI metrics with this biological marker of aging. And now with the next step in the project, we're going to dive deeper into what this association means, as well as look in men. You may or may not know that testosterone drops about 1% to 2% per year in men after the age of 30, 35. So we're interested in reproductive measures of aging in men, as well as there are some aging markers within your DNA. If you've heard the word telomeres before, they're little caps of DNA at the end of your chromosomes, and they tend to shrink over time with age. So we're studying with a very generous grant from the NMSS how that marker could tell us. And what's really exciting is, although these markers of aging, that your DNA, these telomeres may shrink over time, we know there are processes that can reverse that. And we also know from the aging literature that there is a lot of new trials and targets to try to take out some of these aspects of the biology of aging. And if that were relevant for MS, it opens up a whole new field of potential targets in progressive MS.
Next, you're going to hear from Dr. Jonah Chan. Dr. Chan's research led his team to the first instance of producing remyelination in the lab. I'm going to ask him how his discovery of an antihistamine that proved to be useful as a potential treatment for multiple sclerosis led to this historic discovery.
The work that earned you the Barancik Prize in 2013 had to do with developing a screening tool that uncovered a promising target for drugs that might stimulate repair. Can you give us an update on what your team's finding related to clinical trials of the antihistamine clemastine?
Sure. So clemastine is a is a first-generation antihistamine that we found in our screens, in an unbiased screen, that had this strong potential to push these oligodendrocyte precursor cells to differentiate into mature oligodendrocytes and form myelin. And so we have taken this finding into the clinic. Recently, we just published our findings in The Lancet, and it was successful. So it was the first successful trial for remyelination. While the magnitude of the effect is not huge, wasn't huge or anything, we're really excited about this finding because it lets us know that repair is possible. And this is an off-target effect. We now know that at the dosage that we're using in our particular trial, what we call receptor occupancy, so it's how much of the receptor target is being affected by the drug. We know we need to reach levels about 50% receptor occupancy. In our trial, we're only hitting about 10 to 15% of the receptor, and we're seeing this effect. And so this is really exciting. This original trial was done in chronic optic neuropathy, not acute optic neuritis. And so these are patients that have had MS for many years. So we're starting the second trial now for acute optic neuritis, hoping to see a bigger effect. But ultimately, what we're looking for are drugs that we can give patients safely, that are going to be more effective, that we can really see real changes in their lives.
In this last clip, you'll hear this year's winner of the Barancik Prize for Innovation in MS Research, Dr. Robin Franklin, talk about where his research fits into the bigger picture of understanding MS, and I think he uses just a brilliant metaphor that really explains where we are today.
Robin, you're also involved in a clinical trial of a myelin repair strategy. What's your vision for how myelin repair might be used in the future treatment of people with MS?
So let me just tell you a little bit about the trial that we're doing. So like Jonah, we've been interested in identifying mechanisms which make a brain stem cell become a new oligodendrocyte, which makes new myelin that replaces the myelin that's lost in the disease. And we identified a target, a mechanism by which stem cells become oligodendrocytes, against which drugs are effective. And much the same way as in Jonah's trial, we've been able to take a drug that already exists and do what is called repurposing and use it in a different application. Now, the wheels of these processes turn slower in the United Kingdom than they do in the United States. So Jonah has finished his trial, but we've only just started ours. So it's ongoing and will finish towards the end of this year. So we don't know the outcome of that yet, but we hope it's going to be promising. We are in the foothills of regenerative medicines in MS, but at least we're at that point, which wasn't the case a few years back. So to answer the second part of your question, what is the role of regenerative medicines? Well, I kind of think generally in very simplistic terms, but if you think simply about how you could treat MS, there are two aspects to it. One is to try to stop the damage taking place in the first instance, and we know that's driven by the immune system going awry. And actually, medicines that do that dampen down the immune system, destroying oligodendrocytes, has been one of the great success stories in modern medicine. And there are now a whole slew of drugs that do that very effectively. But the second part of treating MS is to repair the damage that you haven't been able to stop. And that's really the business that we're in. If I could use an analogy here, I mean, one of the things I like to do is hill walk in the UK. I guess you'd call it trail hiking here or some other term. And generally speaking, in the United Kingdom, when you walk in the hills, you walk in the clouds because it rains most of the time, as many of you know. I mean, it's one of the things that you will laugh about the UK, but it's true. And so when you're up in the hills in the clouds, you sort of know where you've left the car, vaguely, but you're walking in the mist. And that's where we were for many years. We knew what we wanted to achieve. But we're now in a position where, if I could use the hill walking analogy, all of a sudden the mists have cleared, and you can see where the car is. it's still some way off, but you know which direction you're heading in. You can see it, and that's the way you're going. And that's really where we are now. The mists have cleared. What was aspirational a few years ago is now reality. Jonah's trial was absolutely pioneering, and he deserves all the credit he should get and more for that. There is our own trial chugging along. It will be completed. But there are going to be a whole host of other similar trials based around a very detailed, secure understanding of the fundamental biology. And that has been, I think, one of the areas where the MS community has been particularly to its credit, actually, that it has made progress in this field based not on wild speculation, but on detailed understanding of the knowledge base that is required.
So to paraphrase Dr. Franklin, the mists have cleared and we can see where we're headed. And even if you don't understand a single word of some of the scientific terminology, some of the jargon that you just heard in these 3 clips, I hope you're feeling as hopeful about the future as I am when you hear Dr. Franklin say in plain English that when it comes to unraveling the mystery of MS, the mists have cleared and science can see where it's headed. That's just an incredibly powerful statement. And the first time I heard it, I got goosebumps. And in a moment, we're going to meet someone else whose dedication and sense of commitment at a very young age also gave me goosebumps. We're going to be joined by my guest on the podcast, Emily Blossberg. A few weeks ago, we had the CEO of the International MS Federation on the podcast, and I remarked that MS didn't respect borders. Well, we also know that MS also doesn't respect age limits. Although MS most commonly occurs in adults, it's also diagnosed in children and adolescents. As a matter of fact, it's estimated that between 8,000 and 10,000 children and teens under the age of 18, just in the United States, are living with multiple sclerosis. And researchers believe that between 2 and 5% of all the people with MS actually experienced the onset of symptoms before they were 18. My guest today is Emily Blossberg. Emily is the creator of Oscar the MS Monkey, and I've been looking forward to this conversation. Welcome to the podcast, Emily.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you, and I'm hoping you can tell us a little bit about Oscar the MS Monkey.
Yeah, so Oscar the MS Monkey is a nonprofit organization focused on providing resources and connection to pediatric MS patients and their families. Some of the things that we do, we send out care packages to kids around the world. Each of them has one of Oscar's buddies, which is a smaller version of Oscar, who is a soft monkey. So we send those around the world, but then in addition to that, we host a family camp for pediatric MS families.
Well, I'm curious, what made you decide to step in and actually start this venture?
I actually was diagnosed with MS myself when I was 15 years old, and I went to the MS Society and I asked if they could help me connect with the other teens in my area who have the same diagnosis as me. And they said, well, you're the only one that we know of. And so it took over a year to find someone who lived about 5 hours away. We connected, and then I connected with another girl on Facebook who was in North Carolina. She was diagnosed when she was 4 years old, and I was the first person her age she had talked to also living with MS, her age. And so that was the day I put my foot down, and I said, this has to stop. Kids shouldn't have to feel lonely for 12 years of their life and feel like they're fighting MS alone. Kids should be able to have these common connections with each other to make their MS journey easier to manage.
And the next thing you know, this sock puppet of a monkey with a tremendous amount of personality, I have to say, just sort of appeared on the scene.
You did. When I first, I grew up knitting. I love knitting. You would never see me without a pair of knitting needles in my hand. My teacher usually got pretty annoyed with it, but that didn't bother me. But when my symptoms started when I was 14 years old, I had to stop knitting because the yarn was hurting my fingers because my skin is so sensitive. My nerves were all out of whack and just not not wanting to deal with that. So a friend of mine taught me how to make sock monkeys, and I started making sock monkeys. And then one day, a couple years later, I decided to make one for myself, and that was Oscar. And Oscar has traveled around with me and has become my mascot of Oscar the MS Monkey.
So when someone receives one of these care packages from Oscar, what are they actually going to receive?
So in the care package is one of Oscar's buddies, which is a smaller version of Oscar. They're all handmade. They're all personalized. In addition, there's a game for the monkey to play with on their journey to their new home. There's some literature for the monkey to share with their new owner, their new family. There's a handwritten note from Oscar himself. And there's a couple other surprises in the boxes, especially for the kids.
Now, I think I read somewhere that at least at the onset, you were making literally every one of Oscar's buddies that you sent out. Is that something you're still doing, or do you have some help on hand now?
I do a majority of the work. I have just recently started recruiting volunteers to help me do some of the stitching, some of the stitching on the sewing machine. And then usually I have family members help me with stuffing them before I assemble the monkeys and, and personalize them, make them come to life.
So I'm curious, what sort of feedback have you received from some of the recipients when they receive one of these care packages from Oscar?
The feedback that I received is so heartwarming. There was a package I sent out a few months back to a 5-year-old, and he brings it to every single doctor appointment. He brings it to every infusion that he goes to, and it's his best friend, really. He sleeps with it every single night, and he has been able to use his monkey to describe his symptoms to his parents, and because then he can put the pressure on the monkey instead of himself. So instead of it being, my leg feels numb and tingly today, and that would make his parents worry. But if he said that his monkey's leg was tingling and hurting, then the pressure is off of him, and instead it's the monkey having the problem that day.
I heard you also mention family camp. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we actually just had a family camp a couple weekends ago. It was phenomenal. We had families from around the world come and participate in discussions led by neurologists and by school experts talking about school accommodations that students can get. We had a lot of art time, a lot of time to play in the snow, and most importantly, just a time for the families to connect. The camp is for any family who has someone under the age of 25 with an MS diagnosis. It is held near Minneapolis, Minnesota, in the cold of the winter, because when is another better time to experience Minnesota cold and Minnesota snow than in the middle of February.
As you were describing that, I initially thought, wow, this camp is great for the young people to actually connect face to face. But as you were talking about it, I realized this must be a really special time for their parents also, who are the parents of someone dealing with pediatric MS, and they probably also don't have a lot of folks right around them in their community who are sharing that experience. And this really gives them an opportunity to connect as well, doesn't it?
That is absolutely true. The parents really enjoyed the time to be able to share their experiences, to get advice from other parents. And actually, Mr. Oscar Monkey, or Oscar the MS Monkey, partners with another organization called Pediatric Multiple Sclerosis Alliance. And it's a group of parents from around the world who all have a child with MS. It's a really great support group. A lot of advice shared in that group, and it's a great resource for those parents. During our camp, we actually had one breakout session where we separated the parents from the MSers and from the siblings, so that each of those groups could kind of go over they're a part of the MS journey. Parents were able to discuss what they wanted to discuss. The MSers were able to talk about anything that related to their life with MS. But then also we recognize that MS affects the siblings as well. MS is definitely a family disease. It does not only affect the one person who has MS, it affects the entire family. And we wanted to recognize that by making a special time specifically for the siblings.
I just think that's so smart. It's something that I've said to people for years, that MS infects an individual but impacts an entire family. So thank you for doing that. I just think it's such a smart thing to do. What's the next step for you, or the next step for Oscar?
Well, the next step for Oscar is to continue holding the Buddy Dash, which is the family camp, continue sending out packages. But we are heading to the CMSC in Nashville at the end of May. We're going to be there to further educate all of the medical experts who will be in attendance at that conference about pediatric MS. And I'm just coming up with more and more ideas of how we can help the pediatric MS community.
Well, that's really good news. Personally, it's good news. That means I get to meet up with Oscar again because I'm also headed there. So I'll look forward to that. And speaking of connecting, how can people connect with Oscar on social media? I assume he must be out there.
Yeah, so on Facebook, we are Oscar the MS Monkey. And on Instagram and Twitter, it is at Mr. Oscar Monkey.
Great. And if people know someone who might enjoy receiving one of Oscar's buddies in that care package, what should they do?
The best thing to do is to contact Oscar through either social media, either send him a message on Facebook, or you can email Oscar at oscar@mroscarmonkey.org. So that's oscar@mroscarmonkey.org. And we'll respond to that. We'll work out donation or payment information and get a package off to your loved one.
That's great. And I know you did mention that what you've set up is a nonprofit. So if we have some listeners who are listening right now and they want to help further Oscar's work by making a donation, how can they go about doing that?
You go to mroscarmonkey.org and you'll see a button that says donate. And all donations are tax deductible since we are a registered 501c3 nonprofit organization.
You know, I have to tell you, Emily, I really pride the podcast on being able to interview people who are changing the landscape, who are really making the world a little bit better for people who are living with multiple sclerosis. And a lot of times that means we end up talking with researchers and scientists who are doing cutting edge work. And I have to tell you that in your way, I think your work is every bit as important. You're certainly making the world a little bit better and a little nicer and a little friendlier for younger people who are dealing with MS and a little more supportive of their families. And I want to really thank you for that. I think you're doing something really important and really great.
Well, thank you. It's good to hear that.
And I want to thank you for spending a few minutes talking with us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and have a great rest of your day.
And that's going to wrap up this week's episode of Real Talk MS. My name is John Strum. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.